And with no further ado, I think I should give Shelley the floor and introduce the RDA Fair Data Maturity Model.
Thank you, Corinna. And yeah, I did add a slide to the deck, so I don't have to forget the link. So hi, I work at the American Geophysical Union. I am our Senior Director for Data Leadership. I have an extensive background in data management and software development and management. And I came to AGU in order to work through challenges around our community, all the different stakeholders, and bringing awareness of the importance of data and software management. And I also have an extensive background in the capability maturity model that is been around for 30 years, started by Carnegie Mellon in an FFRDC, hosted or sponsored by the Air Force. So the capability maturity model is commonly applied to software development. And you become certified in applying it, and you become certified in how it's been applied. And it's a methodology that's been used. It's an open methodology, and it's been used to help people think about applying a framework. And that's what happened in RDA. That exact methodology was not applied directly, but the concept was applied. And what was happening is there were a number of us, FAIR came out, we all know this, maybe you don't, but it did. 2016, the FAIR guiding principles were published in Springer Nature, incredibly heavily cited document. And it generated this, the word that I really like that others have used is called an inflection point. A number of communities within research needed a way to talk about best practices so that everyone could head in the same direction on how to make data and software findable or discoverable, how to make it accessible in a way where you didn't have to ask someone for access or you didn't have to know the secret code, that it was in a format that was usable. Interoperable is sometimes a really difficult thing to get your arms around. And then did you license it in a way that others actually have the capability of reusing your data? And EDI is, I'm very biased about EDI. They're one of my favorite repositories because you all have been thinking about this for a very long time. And you have been ahead of the work happening in FAIR. You've actually, because of what your community has needed, you have actually tried to figure out what these things are without having the acronym, and then the acronym showed up. So I really like using EDI as an example because it demonstrates the value that implementing FAIR has to a community. Now you're asking the question, how well have you implemented this particular framework? I think that's great. So let's move on. I'll tell you about this work. So I'm a co-chair of the RDA Fair Data Maturity Model working group, which is now in maintenance mode. And there's a number of folks that have helped it directly, and then a very large community that has been part of the development of this model. So next slide. So what we are, so the context of how we went about building the recommendations had to do with the number of assessments that were built around those FAIR guiding principles. And then communities were adopting and adapting it to their own needs, but there was no common way to look at it. The principles themselves are not strict. There's a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of room for interpretation. And we were looking for a way to be able to compare apples to apples across the existing assessment methodologies. So what would that look like? What would a core, it says here, a core assessment criteria be? And there's a lot of materials to read about this. I'm going to give those all to you. That it would take some hours for us to walk through everything. And I think Corinna has some questions. So let's just jump to the next slide. So what we tried not to do, what we were very deliberate in not doing and kept out of our scope, was we were not building an evaluation method. We were building a framework instead. And we told you what to do, not how to do it. So that's the nature, that's the way we took a framework. That's also how the capability maturity model does their framework, um, uh, in order to allow for different communities to apply criteria in ways that were meaningful. It gives that flexibility. And we stuck we although there are areas that are weak within the FAIR principles, depending on your different perspectives, we stuck to them so that we could keep a steady scope. And now at this point in maintenance mode, we're looking at what those gaps are. So next slide. The path took a while. So remember the FAIR data, the FAIR principles came out in 2016. They were meant to apply to data, but they're broad enough that they can apply to other digital products. And the working group established in 2019, we were very blessed. The European Commission has been putting a lot of money into implementing FAIR. If you don't know, the FAIR is FAIR project and EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud, they're pretty much funding those things, and they gave us an editorial support. So the co-chairs actually leaned on folks that could actually type notes and synthesize content and have some nice thoughtful conversations, but take direction straight from the co-chairs. And this helped a very large project move very swiftly. And we were able to get the first version out of the model in early 2020 and get that published. And now we're working on adoption and getting feedback and figuring out what the next version of that model is going to look like. Next slide. By the way, we no longer have our editorial staff, which is why things have all of a sudden moved much more slowly. So this is the process. I don't know that you really care about the process too much, so I'm going to skip this slide. If we need to go back, we can talk about it more. And then the different stakeholders have different purposes and methods and objects. So we try to consider all of the different points of view in the way we went about our work. That doesn't mean everyone was happy fully, but there was a way forward, and very, very sensitive towards our approach. And also realizing that with a framework as a tool, it can be wielded in ways that are difficult for researchers as a go, no-go criteria. And we were also really cautious to watch for that rhetoric and guide away from it. This is meant to help research communities, like repositories, like researchers, make progress towards something. Getting all the way there is not necessarily the gold star. Getting partway there could be good enough. So we were really cautious on that rhetoric. So next slide. And this is where we are. What's sort of groups we're targeting for adoption. Funders are, as you can imagine, funders are interested. The European Commission was very interested. Communities, and then what do we need to do going forward? And you see the note there about fair enough. 100% is not necessarily how we like to talk about things, because everyone's in a different place, but moving towards improvement, giving a path for improvement is really valuable. And then what does that mean? So next slide. These were the challenges that we had. So we can come back to this slide if you want to go on to the next one. And the additional challenges. If you were trying to apply this process to other things, what you really needed to be aware of. What was time consuming, the importance of face-to-face meetings. We did most of this work face-to-face at RDA sessions with supporting online sessions. And then when pandemic hit, I was just really grateful that we were nearly done, because people are very passionate about this, and it's helpful to be with someone to talk through a challenge. It's harder to do that online, I think, as we all know. Being open to feedback, having an opportunity for feedback, making sure people felt heard, and then what does it mean to provide maintenance? I would say we're not really doing a really good job with that now. that's an area that we can actually improve because we lost our main support system for keeping things moving. The makeup of the co-chairs, we're all very busy, so it's been hard for us to keep that going. Although it's just not as fast. Next slide. And here, so I realize this is baked into the slides, but Corinna has them, and you're all welcome to take a look at those materials. But I do want to take a moment to talk about what we're doing within AGU, because I think this might help you realize how much we need the work that you're doing here in EDI to help other communities talk to researchers. So if you could go on to the next slide. Oh, I popped this. Okay, yeah, this is great. Okay, so our recommendation is published on the RDA website underneath the working group. And there is a companion document to walk you through how this all happened in the Data Science Journal for CODATA. And this was published in 2020, I think. As everyone, time is squishy. So I think it was 2020, may have been 2021. Don't laugh at me. It might have been the end of 2020 and I'm thinking 2021. I think it was the end. I think it was November. So this would be a really good way to introduce you to the recommendations. And then the full set of recommendations are on the RDA website. Actually, there's a Noto community where you can download those. So next slide. So there's a number of use cases we've gathered. This particular one, I think, is a nice complement to the work that Matt Jones is doing that came out of the European Commission that I would like to highlight to you that you may not be aware of. Part of Fair is Fair was to come up with a tool, and this one is open and available, that can apply to any repository, any data that applies the FAIR criteria. And to the credit of this group, they embraced the FAIR data maturity model as a guide for how to do that. It wasn't the only thing they did, but they did use it, and we're very grateful for that. So it helps to connect the model, the framework, with an actual tool, an assessment methodology. And so I would highly recommend you walk through it. They take every single element within the framework and show you what they did, how they applied it, and knowing that we don't necessarily have mechanisms for everything in the community yet, but I want to highlight for you something that that's very special within EDI that is not true most other places. And when we talk about vocabulary and how you align vocabulary to a data set, EDI gives the researcher a way to do that easily. Because of all of the work you've already done within your system. And what you'll see identified here is that is not common. And they actually chose, of all the elements within the FAIR criteria, they actually chose not to touch vocabulary because they couldn't go to vocabulary directly. It's not mature enough yet. But because EDI has figured out for your community what the best vocabulary is and the options that are available, you have answered the question and you've baked it into your system. So that's a really big deal. Okay, next slide. So in case you've not seen this is something that I tend to always lead in a talk that I give about the work at AGU, our position statement on data, which does include software as well, and how Earth, space, and environmental science data, I always added in, depending on where you are, you either see yourself in Earth and space or you do not. And if you're in the world of environmental data, you do not. So Earth, space, and environmental data are a world heritage. It's really important with the work that we do in supporting researchers around the globe, that we make that data available. It's preserved, it's documented. You can read the whole thing. It's about a 2-page document, and it guides the work that we do. And so repositories, finding discipline-specific repositories is really important. Next slide. It's important but hard, and I'm going to get to that point. So we have taken a number of approaches to guide our authors and researchers on finding the best repository for their data. This is one of the hardest. I never imagined this when I joined AGU, that this would be one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it is. And I'm going to show you how I'm still not good with our solution. I want you to know that, but I want you to see how we're going about it. And maybe as you're thinking about your metadata and you're thinking about how you're working with EDI and how you're making your metadata searchable, the kinds of problems we're running into, and wouldn't it be great if other repositories could be more similar and think about it from a different point of view. So on this resources page, which is in GitHub, by the way, so you can do pull requests and make comments. We have a resource, I think it's on the next slide, that we've just recently built. We've been tinkering away on our author guidelines for data and software availability statements and citations, so that directly dovetails straight into what repository. And this one is organized by journal. It's not going to be our last one. We're going to give it another go this year on reworking this. Doing it by journal is still not the right way. But if you please take a look sometime and just look what we're struggling with and think about the entire repository community, including general, including institutional, including national repositories, because it's, we have an international author base where 50% are in Asia. We're really challenged with how to direct them to the best possible repository. I wish I could just put EDI at the top and say, go here, but that's not realistic. So it's a real problem. And I don't want you to solve it now. This is not the reason for this webinar, but as you're thinking about how to improve EDI, you're actually helping me solve this problem by working through the issues that researchers are having and how best to find data, so that it will come back to benefit me sometime. Next slide. That's it.